Elena wakes before dawn, listening to the city breathe. Light sneaks under the blinds like a secret. The apartment smells of coffee and yesterday's stories. Daniel sleeps beside her with the slow evenness of someone who trusts the world. She watches him because she is thinking about the conversation they have avoided. They met at a winter fundraiser when he spilled red wine and laughed it off. That laugh drew her closer than any argument ever could. Early on, he says small things like, "You are brave," and she believes him. Now, months of polite distance make bravery feel heavy. One Thursday, Daniel brings his family over. Camilla, his sister, hums while stirring stew. Rosa, his mother, brings a bouquet that smells of oranges. They move through the apartment with an easy certainty Elena doesn't share. Their words are comfortable. Their gestures are claims. After they leave, Daniel says, "We need to talk about the future." He sits on the couch like someone preparing a mold. He speaks calmly, folding words into careful shapes. "My mother thinks our family must look a certain way," he says. "She doesn't like some of your choices." Elena looks at him and feels something tilt. "What choices?" she asks, though she already knows. Her late nights writing, the candid photos, the way she laughs loud enough to be noticed. Daniel says she thinks you are too independent. She says it might cause gossip. She wants someone who will fit. He says the last word as if it might solve things. He offers her an ultimatum without saying the word. "Choose her or your dignity," he says. The word dignity lands strangely between them, both a shield and a coin. Elena leaves that night without packing. She walks the city, cataloging how ordinary everything looks under street lamps. Jordan meets her for tea on the balcony and says, "He is testing you. What does dignity mean for you?" Jordan taps his saucer when he thinks and has a plain way of saying hard things. She answers, "It means not pretending to be acceptable for someone else's comfort." Her voice is thin and honest. Jordan says, "Then don't hand it back." A small subplot begins when Elena takes a freelance gig editing a series about women-run businesses. She spends afternoons at a tiny seamstress shop owned by a woman named Rosa. Not the same Rosa, but a seamstress who never lets mending hide the tear. The seamstress teaches Elena how to pin a hem so it holds without erasing the history of the fabric. Elena tucks that lesson into her pocket. At home, Daniel wavers. Sometimes he apologizes for his mother's words. Sometimes he repeats them as if they were facts. Camilla offers sweet talk and sharp suggestions. She says families need shape and speaks as if life were a recipe with a measured list of acceptable ingredients. Rosa, Daniel's mother, visits unannounced. She studies Elena like a catalog. "You are different," she says. "We must preserve the family's image." Her voice is polite, and it cuts. Elena replies, "I am not here to be shaped for a photograph." Rosa smiles in the way people smile when they think victory is polite compliance. Days accumulate. Elena starts a night writing workshop and teaches podcast editing at a community center. She writes about the seamstress's hands and her own mother's stories. The work grows. A local award recognizes the podcast series she edited. People begin to notice her voice. A woman approaches her after a talk and says, "You gave me courage." Elena tucks that sentence into her skin. The family pressure intensifies. Rosa makes sharp remarks about Elena's posts, commenting on a photograph of Elena at a rally as if public voice were a scandal. The words are precise and cool. She says, "A wife should keep the family calm." The comment arrives in a message that Daniel reads aloud and then looks away. The air between them hardens. Elena feels each remark like a pinprick. She starts noting the instances in a small journal, cataloging what is said and when. Writing it down helps her see a pattern and keeps the memory from unraveling at night. She dates the entries and writes small factual sentences that make the situation look less like chaos and more like evidence. At the community center, she teaches a night class in podcast editing. Students arrive with headphones slung around their necks and brilliant, messy ideas. Elena listens to their stories and gives them blunt, loving edits. She claps when someone nails a sound mix, and she taps the desk when someone hesitates. The trade of work and praise steadies her. It gives her a place to prove value beyond family gossip. One evening, a shy student named Priya stays late and says, "You helped me get my voice back." Priya smells like curry and printer ink. She has a habit of twisting her ring when she's nervous. Elena tells her to keep talking and to record everything. The compliment becomes another small stone in a foundation. The family pressure intensifies further. Rosa makes sharp remarks about Elena's posts. Daniel suggests small compromises. Her posts could be quieter, her wardrobe different. He frames each suggestion as a love offering. Elena feels each suggestion as a small subtraction from herself. At a relative's party, a cousin asks if Elena plans to stop working after marriage. Daniel fails to defend her. His silence tastes like surrender. Elena packs a bag that night and leaves the apartment with slow, precise movements. Daniel blocks the doorway and says, "You can't leave now." He says it like timing can remake the moral shape of a decision. Elena says, "I'm leaving because I refuse to trade myself for approval." Her voice is steadier than she expects. She steps past him and closes the door. For weeks, she sleeps on a friend's futon and pieces her life together like a patchwork. Jordan helps her set up freelance accounts and a small website. The seamstress's shop becomes a refuge. Elena teaches classes, sews when she can, and writes pieces that name the quiet ways people are asked to change. Rumors begin to spread. A cousin mutters that Elena left because she is, quote, difficult and ambitious. Clients hesitate. A seminar loses sponsorship. Elena sits on the floor and feels the sting of reputation fraying like old thread. She could shrink back. Instead, she writes an essay about choice and dignity and publishes it under her name. The piece circulates on social feeds and in inboxes. Some readers praise it, others criticize. The comment section is a mirror with cracks. A radio host invites her to speak live about the essay's themes. Elena rehearses her answers until phrases feel precise and not like defenses. On air, she speaks softly, but clearly. Dignity, she says to the host, isn't vanity. It's the space to make choices that let you sleep at night. Her voice trembles once and steadies. After the interview, messages arrive from strangers who say she has described a thing they couldn't name. One woman writes, "My daughter needed you to say that." The words arrive like warm hands. Daniel listens on his way to work. Later he calls and says, "You humiliated us." His voice is tight with a pain that has been turned on her. Elena answers, "I told you dignity was not negotiable. I didn't go public to hurt anyone. I went public because silence was dangerous." The conversation fractures into smaller pieces. Daniel says he feels pressure from his family that he cannot ignore. Elena hears the difference between feeling pressure and choosing to bow to it. She tells him that loyalty that costs a life is not loyalty at all. They hang up with the worst kind of exhaustion, unresolved, raw. That unresolved ache becomes fuel. Elena writes more, speaks at a small festival, and mentors a young editor who wants to start a show about immigrant entrepreneurs. The projects pile up like purposeful stones. Each one is a proof that her life is more than a rumor. Daniel calls sometimes, and then learns to call more. He visits with smaller excuses and means it. He comes to the community center and sits in the back of her class with his jacket on and a slightly nervous smile. He claps at the end and asks questions afterward, awkward but earnest. Priya waves at him shyly and thanks him for being there. At home, he fumbles through apologies. One night he says, "I am sorry I didn't stand up for you." He adds, "I thought I was protecting the peace." Elena listens. She knows words are the start, not the finish. She tells him what she needs. Not theatrical declarations, but visible acts. He nods and takes the list like a man ready to practice. She writes an essay about choice and dignity and publishes it under her name. The piece circulates. Some readers praise it. Others criticize. A radio host invites her to speak. She accepts. The pieces of their life begin to rearrange. She measures change in small things. Daniel returns an accusatory message instead of ignoring it. He posts a short note defending her right to speak. When a cousin spreads gossip at a brunch, Daniel stands and says, That's enough. His voice quavers, but he says it. That small public defense shifts something. A few relatives look away and the comment dies. Not all battles go well. Another time, Rosa corners him and says, "You made a choice the family will not forget." Daniel looks younger than his age in that moment, as if someone pulled the rug out from under him. He holds firm anyway, and Elena watches the small, painful bloom of a man learning new muscles. One evening, Daniel goes to see his mother alone. He sits in her kitchen, where the light is soft and the smell of citrus lingers. Rosa folds her hands and says, "I only want what is best for the family." Her voice carries the weight of tradition. Daniel replies, "What is best for the family is not always the same as what is right for the people in it." He says the sentence, like a discovery and like a danger. Rosa studies him and then says, "You are too young to make permanent mistakes." She folds a napkin with precise fingers. Daniel answers, "My life is my mistake to make." She looks away, hurt and steady. That conversation is a small war that ends without a clear winner, but it matters because it stretches the shape of Rosa's notion of family. He leaves with a bruise on his pride and a clearer sense of who he wants to be. Camilla's arc grows too. At first, she is complicit with the family's illusions. She speaks compliments wrapped with critique and assumes the family script is truth. But then she calls Elena late one night. Her voice is smaller. "I told my mother we were wrong," she says. Elena hears the admission and the fear. Camilla explains she has been reading Elena's essays and that something in them felt like a guide. "I liked the way you said things," Camilla admits. "I didn't want to be the first to tell my family no," Elena says. "You can say no and still love them." It is not complete reconciliation, but it is a crack that lets light through. The long-distance months are a collage of small rituals. They keep Sunday morning calls, and Daniel sends photographs of his lunch. Elena sends snippets of a new prototype podcast she is developing. They send each other playlists. Once, Daniel surprises her by showing up at a lecture where she is speaking. He sits in the back, jacket pulled around him, and afterwards, he drinks tea with her students like a guest who wants to show up. These small, consistent acts strengthen the bridge between them. The funding process for Elena's grant is grueling. She writes proposals, edits budgets, and defends curriculum points to committees. She meets with a panel of strangers in a glassed conference room. Her hands shake as she explains how the program will support small artisans. She names Priya and the seamstress and those who need a microphone. A panelist asks, "How will you measure dignity?" Elena smiles and says, "By who keeps coming back. By whether people feel safe telling the truth." It is not a perfect metric, but it is human and honest. Back home, Daniel's family continues to be a complicated map. Rosa attends a community event once to watch Elena in person. She stands at the edge and says nothing. A cousin tries to whisper a critique, but the community sees and responds with kindness instead. Small people offer small resistances, and those resistances begin to matter. Elena faces setbacks too. A sponsor freezes funding after another rumor circulates. She sits with failure like a patient tutor. Instead of panic, she convenes her team and says, "We will find another way." They crowdsource ideas, pitch smaller sponsors, and plan a community fundraiser that features the seamstress and Priya alongside other local makers. The fundraiser is messy and beautiful. People bring casseroles and amplifiers. They sell hand-stitched aprons and run a workshop for teens. Elena watches the room fill with noise and warmth and realizes the work itself is resilience. The rumor that once darkened her prospects returns intermittently, as rumors do. One awkward meeting with a potential sponsor tests her. The sponsor's representative says, "We're concerned about any controversy." Elena answers, "If your measure of controversy is a refusal to let women speak, then I do not fit. But if you want work that engages the community honestly, then I'm your person." The representative hesitates and then opts out. It hurts. It also clarifies what kind of partner she wants. Daniel sits through many of these conversations by video call. When he interrupts a discussion to say, "This work matters," the colleagues on the other end hear someone willing to defend her. he learns the weight of a single sentence. Elena watches him find his voice and is surprised at the way small defenses feel like love. Time passes, and the pattern becomes less jagged. They learn to argue without erasing each other. They learn to keep promises small and measurable. Elena sees love as an agreement with room for dignity. Daniel learns to be a man with a family that does not always approve. Camilla becomes an ally on gentle days and a tentative critic on others. Their relationship never becomes a tidy victory over the family's roots. Rosa never turns into a full-throated supporter. She remains reserved and complex, a woman who understands that a life can be more than one shape. There is a scene years later when Rosa, older and quieter, brings a small plate of oranges to Elena's apartment. She sets it down without ceremony and says, "The city has changed us." It is a tiny concession. Elena accepts it like someone who has learned to keep meaningful things small and steady. At a public event years after the choice, Elena stands with Daniel, and they take turns answering questions. A moderator asks, "How did you survive the pressure?" Elena replies, "I chose to act with care and to ask for visible changes. I learned to test promises with small demands." Daniel adds, "And I learned to be a person who stands beside the woman I love, even when it costs me family ease." Their answers are simple and true. Students from Elena's class come up to her after the event. Priya hugs her and says, "You made space for me to tell the story I carry." A former sponsor calls to say they'd like to support the next season. These moments feel like small rewards. They are not the end of conflict, but they are the weather Elena chooses to live in. At night, when the city quiets and the apartment glows dim, Elena thinks about the choice she made. It was one of those decisions that feels like stepping off a cliff and finding a ladder on the way down. Choosing dignity did not make her life simpler. It made it more true. When she stitches a new hem for a community workshop, she tells the students, "A seam holds more than fabric." It holds respect for what came before and room for what will happen next. They nod and focus. She looks at them and partly sees herself at their age, ready to fold, ready to fight. The story she tells her students is not a manifesto. It is a collection of small tactics. Say clearly what you need, ask for evidence, demand small tests, and forgive when people try and fail and then try again. She teaches them to write the sentences that make a life honest. Daniel often says, "You choose fiercely." He means it as praise and sometimes as wonder. Elena replies, "I choose with care." She says it because the two words together make something like a promise, that love can be fierce and kind at once. When Rosa finally says one evening, "You kept your way," Elena sits with the quiet of the room and understands that a long life of small decisions created that moment. It was not a single dramatic victory. It was the slow accumulation of acts that honored dignity without abandoning the people she loved. The city continues its steady hustle. Elena keeps writing, editing, teaching, and sometimes mending fabric at the seamstress's shop. She keeps the journal where she once cataloged hurts and turns it into a manual for students. She keeps making calls to mentors and shows up to panels to speak for others. In the end, she chose dignity, but not as an ending. She chose it as a way to live, asking others to meet her there or to step aside. People chose to meet her there, some immediately and some reluctantly. Others never did. The life she builds is a patchwork quilt of voices, mistakes, and repairs. It is warm. She folds her hands on her lap and looks at the seam of the dress she is mending. The stitch is even. She breathes in the smell of citrus and of coffee and thinks of all the small stitches she placed into the world. They hold.